My name is Anna, and this is the secret that almost tore apart my 10-year-old marriage to my husband, David. It's a secret that I never thought would cause so much pain and heartbreak, and certainly not one that would put everything I had worked for at risk. It all started with a small issue, something I thought we could easily work through, but over time, it grew into something much bigger, a problem that I couldn't ignore. Before I knew it, it was threatening everything that meant the world to me, the love I had for David, our future together, and the life we had built. I still remember the first time I met David. I was just a teenager, barely old enough to understand what true love really meant. But when I saw him, something clicked. He had a way about him that made me feel safe and special, as though I was the only person in the world who mattered. He was charming, with eyes that sparkled whenever he looked at me, and a smile that could light up the darkest room. We were both young and carefree, filled with dreams of the future, and every moment we spent together felt like it was straight out of a fairy tale. David was different from any boy I had ever met. He wasn't just kind, he was thoughtful, always finding ways to make me feel loved. Whether it was surprising me with small gifts, writing me notes, or just listening to me talk for hours about my day, David always made me feel important. It wasn't just the big things he did, but the little things too, like how he remembered the smallest details about me, what I liked, what made me laugh, and even what made me sad. He made me feel like I was the most important person in his life, and in return, I loved him deeply. I thought, with all my heart, that this love we shared would last forever. We were inseparable during our dating years. Our connection seemed unbreakable, and every day spent together only strengthened my belief that we were meant to be. I often imagined our future, marriage, a home, a family, and I couldn't picture it without him. Every plan I made, every dream I had, was tied to David. And I believed that he felt the same way about me. We were young, yes, but it felt like we had all the time in the world to build a life together, and I was certain that we were on the same page about everything. But as much as I loved him, I started to notice something I hadn't seen before. David's love was intense, almost overwhelming at times. It wasn't just that he cared for me, it was how he showed that care. His love was passionate, sometimes, too passionate. I knew he loved me, I could feel it in everything he did. But there was one thing that began to stand out more than anything else, his constant need for intimacy. It was as if he needed to be with me all the time, not just emotionally, but physically. It wasn't just the normal closeness that comes with a relationship, it was almost as if he couldn't be satisfied unless we were sharing a bed, touching, or being physically close at every moment. At first, I didn't mind. In fact, it felt wonderful. I felt cherished, adored, and as though I was the center of his universe. Every time he held me, kissed me, or looked at me with those deep, loving eyes, I felt special. His love made me feel wanted in a way that I had never felt before. It was thrilling, and I couldn't help but feel completely immersed in it. In those early years, his affection made me feel secure, loved, and completely devoted to him. I thought this was how love was supposed to feel, and I was happy to give him all of me. But as time went on, things started to shift. The constant closeness began to feel more like a weight, something I could never escape. At first, I didn't want to admit it to myself. How could I complain when he loved me so much? How could I possibly ask for more space when his affection was all I had ever dreamed of? But slowly, I began to feel smothered, as though there was no room for me to breathe. It wasn't that I didn't love him back, it wasn't that at all. It was just that I started to crave something I hadn't noticed before, a little bit of freedom, some space to be myself, to focus on things outside of our relationship. I missed having time for my own thoughts, my own hobbies, and my own friends. I started to feel like I was losing parts of who I was in the process of being completely consumed by our love. I wanted to focus on other aspects of my life, to feel like I could be Anna, not just David's wife. And yet, every time I tried to pull away, to take a breath, I felt like I was failing him, like I wasn't enough. His desire for me was so strong, and my need for space felt like a rejection, even though I didn't want it to be. There were days when I longed to be apart, to have a little time to myself, but whenever I tried to explain it to him, I worried that he wouldn't understand. How could he? His love for me was so intense, and he gave so much of himself that I felt guilty for needing anything other than him. But in the quiet moments, when we weren't tangled up in each other, I realized I needed something more than just his love. I needed to find myself again, to remember who I was outside of our relationship. And I had no idea how to balance the two. Yet, I didn't want to hurt him, so I kept quiet. I ignored those little feelings, thinking that it was normal. After all, he loved me so much, how could I complain? But as we got older, and especially after we got married, things didn't get better, they got harder. The love we shared was still strong, but the intensity of it, the constant need for affection and attention, began to weigh on me. I started to wonder why David couldn't control his desires, why he couldn't understand that love didn't always have to be so consuming. I felt like I was losing myself, and every time I tried to voice my need for space, he didn't seem to hear me. I kept convincing myself that this was just part of being in love, that it was normal, and that I was just being too sensitive. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The man I had fallen in love with, the man who once made me feel like the most important person in the world, was now making me feel like I was his only source of happiness. And that was something I wasn't prepared for. I knew that in order to keep our marriage intact, something had to change, but I didn't know what or how. When we got married, I thought things would settle down. I imagined that the intensity of our early relationship would calm, that we would find a rhythm together, something balanced. But instead of getting easier, things only seemed to get more complicated. David's passion for intimacy didn't fade, it only grew stronger. The love we shared was still as powerful as ever, but now it felt overwhelming, like a constant wave I couldn't escape from. His desire for closeness never seemed to slow down, and I started to feel like I was drowning in it. I loved him deeply, and I still wanted to be close to him, but the way he expressed that love began to make me feel trapped. Every time he came to me, it was as if there was no choice but to give him what he wanted, to be what he needed. There was no room for me to voice my own needs, my own desires. I started to feel like I was simply an extension of him, someone who was there to fulfill his desires, but not someone with my own voice or space to breathe. I wanted to tell him how I was feeling, to explain that I needed some space, some time to myself, but the words never came out. How could I say something so painful? How could I tell the man I loved that I was suffocating under the weight of his love? It wasn't that I didn't love him. I still loved him with all my heart, but I was afraid of what might happen if I spoke up. I didn't know how to tell him that I needed something different, something more balanced. Every time he came to me, I felt like I had to comply. There was no room for my own needs, and no space to ask for what I needed without feeling guilty. I started to question myself, wondering if I was being unreasonable or selfish for wanting a little independence, for needing time away from him. It felt like his love for me was so consuming that there was no room for anything else, and I didn't know how to handle it. The more I kept silent, the more trapped I felt. I loved him, but at the same time, I longed for some distance. I wanted to feel like myself again, like I had control over my own life and not just over the role I played in his. But I didn't know how to express any of this without hurting him, and the fear of pushing him away kept me silent. So, I continued to smile and give in, pretending that everything was fine, when inside, I was slowly breaking. One evening, after yet another exhausting night, I reached my breaking point. I had been holding it all in for so long, pretending like everything was okay, when deep down I felt like I was losing myself. I couldn't keep living in this cycle, feeling like I was nothing more than an extension of his desires, unable to speak up or set any boundaries. I loved David, but I was suffocating. It wasn't healthy for either of us, and I knew I needed to take control of my life again. That night, something shifted inside me. I realized I had been giving in to his needs for so long that I had forgotten to take care of my own. It wasn't just about me anymore, it was about our relationship and what it was turning into. I didn't want to lose David, but I also didn't want to lose myself. So, I made a decision. The next time he asked for intimacy, I would say no. I needed him to understand that love isn't just about satisfying desires, it's also about respecting each other's boundaries. It was time for me to teach him discipline, to show him that our connection needed to be about more than just physical closeness. As the night wore on, my mind kept racing. Would he understand? How would he react? I had never said no to him before, never even considered it. In the past, when he came to me with that familiar look in his eyes, I had always given in, unsure of how to say no, afraid of how he might take it. But now, as I lay in bed next to him, I knew I had to do this. I had to stand up for myself, for my own well-being, even if it meant facing an uncomfortable situation. Then the moment came. I could feel his presence, his warmth beside me, the familiar closeness. And when he reached for me, I felt a surge of nerves and fear in my chest. But I knew this was the moment I had been waiting for. With a deep breath, I turned to face him, looking him in the eyes. My heart was racing, my palms were sweaty, but I forced myself to speak. "Not tonight, David," I said, my voice softer than I wanted it to be. "I need some space." It wasn't easy, and the words felt like they weighed a ton. I could see the surprise in his eyes, the confusion, maybe even a little hurt. I didn't know what he was thinking or how he would react, but I knew I had to stand firm. This was the first step in taking back control of my life, in teaching both him and myself that love is about more than just meeting physical needs. It's about understanding and respecting each other's emotions, thoughts, and boundaries. As the silence stretched between us, I felt a rush of both relief and fear. I didn't know what was going to happen next, but I had done it. I had said no. And somehow, I knew things couldn't stay the same after this. David's face changed. He didn't get angry, but I could see the frustration in his eyes. I knew that he didn't understand why I was refusing him. But he didn't argue, he simply turned over and lay down, facing the wall. I could tell that he was upset, but I also felt a sense of relief. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was in control of my own life. The next few days were tense. David didn't speak to me as much as he normally did, and the intimacy that had once been such a constant in our lives seemed to vanish. I thought that maybe this was just a temporary thing, but it didn't stop there. David started acting distant, and soon, I noticed something that broke my heart. He started paying attention to other women. He would smile at them in a way that he hadn't smiled at me in months. I tried not to think too much of it, but I couldn't ignore the signs. One day, I overheard him on the phone, making plans to meet a woman for lunch. My stomach churned with jealousy, but I tried to stay calm. I didn't want to accuse him without evidence. But as the days went on, it became painfully clear that my suspicions were not just doubts, they were the truth. David wasn't just being friendly to these women. It wasn't harmless, he was actually paying them for their attention, his desire for connection being fulfilled by others instead of by me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, what I was seeing. It was as though I no longer mattered, as if I was invisible. The realization hit me like a slap in the face. David, the man I loved and trusted with my whole heart, was turning to other people to satisfy his desires. Instead of coming to me, the one he promised to love, he had found someone else to fulfill his needs. It made me feel worthless, like I was being replaced by others who didn't matter in the grand scheme of things. I felt betrayed, heartbroken, and confused. The love I once felt for him, the deep, unwavering trust, was slowly being chipped away by his actions. Anger began to replace the affection I once had for him. Every time he came home after spending time with these women, it was as if he was a different person. He no longer seemed to care about me, about what I needed, or how I was feeling. He would come in, and there would be no spark between us, no warmth. He didn't even bother to touch me, didn't seem interested in the woman he had once adored. It was like I wasn't even there. I couldn't understand it. If he truly loved me, why wasn't I enough for him? The worst part was that he didn't seem to care if I was in the mood or if I needed affection. He had stopped seeking it from me, and instead, he found it somewhere else. I was left standing in the shadows of our marriage, feeling like I didn't matter, like I was just a figure in the background of his life. I tried to talk to him, to confront him about what was happening, but every time I brought it up, it was as though I was talking to a wall. He would either get defensive, accusing me of not trusting him, or he would simply change the subject, avoiding the issue altogether. It was as if he didn't want to face what was really happening between us, as if he didn't want to acknowledge the hurt I was feeling. His silence spoke louder than words, and I could feel myself drowning in it. As the weeks passed, the emptiness in our marriage grew stronger. I began to feel more and more alone, as if the person I had once loved and trusted was now a stranger. The man I had married, the one I thought I knew inside out, seemed to have disappeared, replaced by someone who didn't care about me the way he used to. I had been so focused on trying to teach him discipline, on pushing him to respect my boundaries, that I hadn't stopped to think about how it was affecting him. I had forgotten to consider his feelings, his needs. In my efforts to protect myself, I had unknowingly pushed him further away. The silence between us became unbearable. The longer we went without communicating, the more distant we became. The space between us felt like an unbridgeable chasm, and I didn't know how to fix it. Every day, the gap seemed to widen. I loved David too much to let everything we had slip away without trying to save it. But I felt lost. How could I bring him back? How could we go from being two people who shared everything to living like strangers under the same roof? Despite all the pain, I couldn't let go of the hope that things could still improve. I couldn't give up on our marriage, not after everything we had been through together. I loved him too deeply to walk away without at least trying to make things right. So, one night, after a long day of pretending everything was fine, I made up my mind. I couldn't keep pretending anymore. I had to confront him. We needed to talk. I waited until we were sitting alone in the living room, the atmosphere thick with unspoken words. I looked at him, my heart racing, and asked the question that had been haunting me for weeks. David, what's going on with us? Why have we grown so distant? For a long moment, there was only silence. He didn't say a word, and I began to wonder if he even knew how to answer me. But finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke, and his words struck me harder than I ever expected. His voice was quiet, full of guilt, and I could see the regret in his eyes. I don't know, Anna. I don't know why I started looking outside our marriage. I just felt like something was missing. I didn't know how to talk to you about it. His words hit me like a ton of bricks. In that moment, everything clicked. I had been so focused on my own frustrations, so wrapped up in my need to protect myself and demand respect, that I hadn't once thought about how he was feeling. I hadn't realized that, in my efforts to teach him a lesson, I had neglected him too. We had both been failing each other, and that was why we had drifted apart. It wasn't just his fault, it was mine too. We had both stopped communicating, stopped truly listening, and that had torn us apart. It wasn't just about the physical distance anymore. It was the emotional distance that had quietly crept in, unnoticed until it was too late. We had both been so focused on our own hurts that we forgot to care for each other. We talked for hours that night, and for the first time in months, we really listened to each other. David admitted that he had been seeking out these other women because he felt rejected and unwanted by me. He hadn't known how to express his feelings without pushing me away. And I admitted that I had been so focused on my own needs that I hadn't paid attention to his. We both realized that we had failed to communicate, and it had almost ruined everything we had built together. It wasn't easy, but we agreed to work together to rebuild our relationship. It would take time, patience, and effort, but we were both willing to try. I promised to be more open with him about my feelings, and he promised to stop seeking attention from other women. We both wanted to save our marriage, and we knew that it would require both of us to make changes. It wasn't an overnight fix. There were still difficult moments, and sometimes we would slip back into old habits. But slowly, we began to find our way back to each other. We started communicating better, setting boundaries, and being more understanding of each other's needs. Looking back now, I can see things much more clearly. The problem wasn't just David's intense desire for intimacy or my refusal to give him what he wanted. The real issue was that we had stopped communicating. Somewhere along the way, we lost our ability to talk openly with each other, and that gap, that silence, allowed the cracks in our marriage to grow wider. It wasn't that we didn't love each other anymore, it was that we had stopped understanding each other's feelings, needs, and fears. We had both failed to listen, and that's what almost tore us apart. I now realize that love alone isn't enough to sustain a marriage. Without communication, without understanding, love can become distant and cold, like two people living parallel lives, unaware of the emotional distance growing between them. The lack of respect for each other's feelings only deepened the divide. David's frustration, my anger, our silence, it all built up, and it nearly cost us everything. But today, things are different. Our relationship is stronger than ever, and I can honestly say we've learned and grown from our struggles. Yes, we still have our ups and downs. There are still moments of tension and disagreement, but now we know how to face them. We've learned the importance of talking things through, of being patient with each other, and most importantly, of respecting each other's needs. We know that it's not always easy, but we're both committed to making it work. We've come so far, and I believe we'll continue to grow together as long as we keep the lines of communication open. Through this experience, I learned that marriage isn't just about love, it's about communication, compromise, and understanding. It's about being there for each other, even when it's hard, and learning to put each other's needs first. It's not always perfect, but it's real. If we want our relationships to last, we have to make the effort to keep them strong. We have to invest in each other's hearts, and that's the lesson I'll always carry with me from the difficult time that almost destroyed my marriage.